Never heard playing mandolin being associated with a bar joke before. That's pretty good. I love that. Hey, what's up, folks? David here, and today I'm excited to be hanging out with one of my favorite mandolin players, Joe K. Walsh. And you guys might know Joe's work from a number of things. He started a band back in the early 2000s called Joy Kills Sorrow, which was very successful. He also played in the Gibson Brothers for a while, and he's part of that acoustic powerhouse group Mr. Sun, which features Daryl Anger, Grant Gordy, and Aidan O'Donnell. But you also might know his solo recordings. He's got a couple of great records out there. One of my favorites is the record Borderland that was released back in 2016. Great stuff on there. But on top of all that, Joe is just a fantastic mandolin instructor. He's part of the faculty of the prestigious Berklee College of Music up in Boston, and he also has some fantastic online courses over at Peghead Nation, so check it out. But I'm excited to have Joe here. We're just going to be talking a lot about improvisation today and how we can express ourselves better as mandolin players in the jam. So welcome, Joe. Thanks so much for joining us here.
Oh man, I'm honored to be asked. Thank you for having me.
Oh, totally, man. So well, what have you been doing like the past year and change here since all this craziness started? You been staying busy, still playing mandolin?
Yeah, definitely. It's funny what changes with what you practice when you don't have that many gigs, right? I'm sure you've noticed the same thing, but and it's not like I ever was practicing stuff I didn't like in that sense, but like not having a gig this weekend or next weekend or in a month, there's no imperative to practice repertoire. You're just really saying, what do I want to do today, or what's holding my curiosity? And that was kind of a beautiful, aspect of the pandemic. I'm saying the positive things, but while acknowledging many, many negative things. I don't mean to gloss over that. But in terms of playing, that's been a beautiful thing. And then there was a lot of space in the day where it was sort of a more patient exploration with music than it had been in a few years.
Absolutely, man. Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about my long-term goals and thinking about like what I should be practicing, to try to get to where I want to be in the next few years. What's been on like your practice docket with that in mind?
Well, there's always been a slight tension between what I listen to and what I play, right? So what I'm trying to do is do more transcribing of what I listen to, and to get more specific. I really love listening to Keith Jarrett and Schofield and Frizzell and people who I think of as really, personal improvisers, beautiful improvisers, really in the moment players. And I really light up when I listen to them. So trying to get a sense of what they're doing has been a real nice challenge.
I'm glad we're talking about this, man. I mentioned I wanted to talk about improv today, and you're one of the top mandolin players I think of when I think of just improvisation as a topic, and for someone who's so good at expressing themselves and trying new things. And I've heard you say that you're not afraid to sound bad, which I think is an awesome thing. Like I get way too wrapped up in my own identity sometimes, and I get scared, or I get like self-conscious about what I play, and sometimes that holds me back from trying new things. But yeah, I just really admire like how you're just in the moment when you play, and it seems like you're always just trying to get to that next level or play that next phrase in a new way. Like, how do you feel like transcribing has informed your ability to do that? Are there any downsides to transcribing as opposed to improvising, or do you feel like transcribing is always something that fuels the improvisation in the moment?
I think the only possible downside is if you only transcribe one person too much. Like early in my time with the mandolin, I learned so much dog stuff, and then it was really clear that every time I played anything, oh, okay, this is what Dog would play, but he would play it better, right? And you don't want that. That's not the vibe. So I think that's the only downside. But the upside to me is like, that's how we accumulate language. That's how we have a sense of what's possible, of how people make decisions. And to me, it feels analogous to like, you're not supposed to invent sentence structure when you learn how to speak. You're not, like, you're mimicking. And then the fact that I mimicked my parents doesn't mean that I am a duplicate of them in the way I speak, and I still have my own personality. And I think it's very analogous. Like, whomever I've learned over the years, I certainly owe some to Dog, and certainly lots of other folks. But I don't think, for better or for worse, that I sound like them.
I found that too. Like, the more you transcribe from different players, the more you kind of see yourself through all of that music, if that makes sense? Or you kind of see yourself in different players in different ways, and you're kind of slowly compiling almost like your own artistic voice from stealing little bits and pieces from different players. Or I've heard like someone say too that as a musician, you kind of are what you eat, and it's good to have like a well-balanced diet, I guess. If like you were to give some advice, especially for people who are just getting started transcribing, how would you go about sitting down to learn like a dog solo or a Jarrett solo or anything like that?
So I think before I learned how to transcribe, when I was going to do this in my first time, I wanted to learn some Miles Davis, and my good friend was like, "Yeah, don't start with that, because rhythmically you're kind of." He didn't say this, but in retrospect, I think what the implication was, rhythmically you're kind of going to be screwed.
Right.
And so I would start with easy stuff, is what I'm trying to say. And maybe easy is the wrong word, but I would start with stuff that doesn't feel the most rhythmically wildly expressive. So for example, Mike Marshall plays with rhythm in a huge way, I think.
Absolutely.
And I don't think you would start with Mike Marshall. But like say a bunch of Sam Bush solos from like that Dolly Parton record.
Oh yeah.
He always plays things that are like, oh yeah, I get that. That's logical, and also it's super inspiring. And I think those are a good place to start. It's really you can understand what he's doing, and also it gets you this beautiful language. And beautiful
Let him go!
Yeah, he's one of those players that always plays like the right thing. You know what I mean? That was one thing that Mike Marshall told me a long time ago. He's like, you should go like learn a couple Shoro tunes, get used to like some different rhythms, and then like go transcribe as much Sam Bush as you can.
Well, did you hear? It actually kind of floored me when I had this conversation with Mike about. I was like, what was he learning before he got to the DGQ, or what was he learning, early on? And he said, I learned every single note that Sam played on a record from 1970 to 1977. That's crazy. That's craziness. And that's such a great example of like what has anybody learned more Sam Bush than Mike? Maybe not. Does Mike sound like Sam Bush? Not at all.
I tell students too how like music transcription sometimes is the biggest bang for your buck, because when you can play the solo note for note and try to match not only the pitches that the player's doing, but also like the musicality behind how they're playing the notes, the volume, the eighth note feel, the tone, all that stuff kind of starts to absorb in your playing subliminally almost, and it comes out in weird ways down the road. Transcribing is probably one of the best things that we can do as mandolin players, right?
Definitely. Absolutely.
Speaking of improvisation, you said you've got this improvisational workshop coming up on Peghead Nation really soon, right?
Starting tomorrow. I'm not sure when this airs, but it may be in the future or in the past, depending on when you drop this.
I'm excited to check out some of these classes myself. I've actually been thinking recently about improvisation too. I hear myself do this sometimes. You learn like your G major scale, for instance, and you're trying to figure out how to use that to improvise in the key of G. And when you start improvising, it just kind of sounds like the G major scale. And how can you play around with the structure of a scale to create something more musical?
Initially it's such a struggle to just to remember what fret, where you're going to find all the scale tones, right? Maybe I'm not sure. I think you're a long ways from that. But I'm trying to go back in my memory too and say, okay, that at some point it was just staying within the key was a little stressful, right? And so I have to you have to just be patient and say, okay, great. I have to just practice playing in this key and maybe even practicing hitting the chord tones in the most cliched way possible, right? Maybe that's where you start. And just it's a given that that's part of this process that you go through. But then as it becomes possible to do that without as much, focus or mental energy okay, I can hit the chord tone on the beat of when the chord changes. Once that becomes a given, I feel like you can be a little more graceful and play with it and say, oh, I know that in 4 beats I'm going to land on, say, G, B, or D. Oh, okay. But maybe I'm going to play with it because everybody expects it to be a chord tone, and I'm going to land on it in 5 beats, that sort of thing.
Right.
Or 3 beats. And I think that sort of decision becomes more possible when you've already internalized the whole okay, I'm just finding the chord tones. Maybe it's not musical right now, but I'm finding the chord tones.
It's almost more important to know the arpeggios rather than the scales too. I don't know if you feel that way too, but do you ever spend time like arpeggiating out the chord changes for a song you're working on?
Definitely. Yeah, that's like probably been the most long-running, consistent exercise that I've done since my time at Berklee, which is 13 years ago now. Yeah, definitely. And that's something I'll be doing in this workshop. But like to describe like a year's worth of work in 1 minute, what I would say is okay, great. Let's say we're gonna play a 1-4-5-1 song, 1-4-5-1 in the key of D, right? So then first I want to say, okay, can I play? Can I play the arpeggios in root position? Okay, can I play them in root position but go down? And then I want to do the same thing with each of those chords but from the third. Or from the fifth. Higher fifth, etc. And then that all kind of leads up to voice-led arpeggios. Arpeggios don't sound like music when you do it like that, except for but if you do it where you can sort of shift from one to the next in the middle without having to always go to the root note, or always doing it in the same way. Basically, if you always do something in the same way, I feel like it stops feeling musical. But so the voice-led arpeggios would be like.
So you're just using chord tones there, and you're just connecting them to kind of like the closest chord tone to the next one.
Yeah, exactly. That's the best way to say it. I'm glossing through it, but let's say I arbitrarily said, again, 1-4-5-1, 4 beats per measure. I'm gonna do 4 beats of D starting on one note. So, and I've ended on A. Can I connect to G instead of going to the root note of G to the nearest chord tone that continues that direction? Okay, and I've arbitrarily given myself a cap, so I'm going to turn around and start on the nearest chord tone from A, which in this case happens to be A. I've run out of A, so now I'm going to go to D.
I don't even know if I can do that. How would it be like a... Oh, no, let's see. That's a really good exercise. I need to incorporate that more. I think I'm a bit more haphazard in my practice sometimes, where I'm just kind of hope that I hit a chord tone, or hope that I hit something close by.
I have a hard time believing it.
Once you've gotten comfortable with the arpeggios, what are some ways for folks to get used to playing the notes in the crack, so to speak? Do you think in the modes? I know it's kind of a bad word to some mandolin players, or a confusing word. Maybe that's a better way to put it. But how do you inform what note choices you have outside the arpeggios?
To me, what comes to mind as an obvious question is okay, are we diatonic? So
right.
if for anybody who doesn't use that word yet, diatonic means the notes that we're using are all coming from one scale, right? So, and that means that the notes of the melody, and the notes of the chords, whatever we're using, are all coming from one scale. So if you can answer that question, is this song diatonic? That clarifies a bunch of your choices, right? So in that situation, if I know we're diatonic to, say, again, D, I would fill in a lot of the spaces with the D scale. So whatever, if I'm on A, knowing that connecting from E to A, if I want it to sound consonant with this tune, the notes of the D scale are going to be my initial choice. And if I want it to sound in tension, the other notes that aren't in the D scale are going to give that. You could visualize which notes are consonant, the arpeggios, which notes are next level, also fairly consonant, the scale tones, and then which ones are the least consonant, the ones in between. And that can help clarify your decisions.
That's kind of an interesting thing too. I guess in improvisation, there's no such thing as bad notes, they say, right?
No, I agree with that. I think that it's when you talk about that stuff, it's really important to use the right language that doesn't make it sound like we're thinking of this as a bad note. It's just, this has tension. This is more intense. This is less intense. a cliche, but I like the idea of what people say, you're supposed to tell a story with your music, like tell a story with your solo. Because to me, when you think about it, what does that mean? Like, what if you tell a story with your music? How could you do that? There has to be something you recognize, a character even, maybe you'd say character. It has to develop, and it can't be all good. What story is just like, happy stuff happens, more happy stuff happens, happiness. That's not a story.
Right.
There has to be tension. There has to be, okay, what's happening? Okay, we got home.
Yeah, I've heard Casey Dreesen say that like a good improviser is always like making the listener say, and then what happened?
If you think about the parallels between improvising or composing and comedy, there's no such thing as an interesting note. There's no such thing as a funny word. It's not like you can say just one word and it's like, ha ha ha, that was a joke. It's not how it works. And the same with okay, I want to play a nice, interesting note that fits this moment. Mostly, I don't think you can solve that. It's really about like, okay, how do I structure something to prepare for how this note is going to sound in relationship to what happened before. Same as a joke. This word is by itself isn't funny, but if you have a setup and prepare an expectation. I mean, like you think about those like 3 people walked into a bar jokes. It's exactly what it's doing. This person and this person, they have this thing in common, so you expect the third person to have this thing in common, and it's not like that. And music is the same way. It's like you can create that expectation, and then whether you meet it or deviate from it, that's, I think, a way of generating interest.
Never heard playing mandolin being associated with a bar joke before. That's pretty good. I love that. For someone who's just getting started, taking the next step beyond playing arpeggios or figuring out what the scales are, how do you practice creating context for your solo like that or telling a story? That seems like the hardest unknown part about improvisation.
To me, that's like it's the hardest part to talk about, but it's the whole thing. It's like, sure, we can improvise with a collection of notes, and that's one thing, and it's fairly achievable to improvise in the key of D. Just play anything, right? but to improvise well, it probably is about how you learn how to create a structure and then play with that structure. Do you know what I mean? Probably some of it is listening to people who do that. Like I think of that Django solo of I'll See You in My Dreams. And if you listen to that, you're like, oh, okay. He's taking an idea. He's modifying the idea. He's modifying the idea again. And we can see how we got from here to there through the same idea. Another way, a more tangible way of saying it would be like the John McGann thing that he said when I was a student, which is like, okay, play an idea. Now play that idea again on the next chord, but change the notes you need to match the next chord. And that's a really simple thing, right? So like if we were thinking again about D on this chord progression, what could I do? So I'm using the same seed idea, 1, 2, 3, and then I'm going to modify it. So that was D, E, F sharp, E, D, E, right? And then I'm going to try and play the same idea, but maybe I can just change that one note, the F sharp to G. And now I have an idea that sounds like it's on G, and also you can hear this idea related to this idea in a really explicit way. And then I could do any number of things. Let's say I did E, G, A, G, E. Let's see. That would be a way of again, maintaining that idea where it's sort of like recognizable for a while. So in context, it could sound like this. And now to me, the thing that I can't resist doing is like, as I said, I'm listening to myself and all the patterns that are sort of accruing. And if I do the exact same rhythm for too many measures in a row, I personally, it's like I'm driving myself crazy. So if I did that for like 4 bars, listen to how bad it sounds. I hate it, right? But it's not very far. If you modify that, it's not very far from something you might like. So like taking that 4-note idea, the thing that's really killing me is that it always starts and ends in the same place. So if I make it smaller, make it longer, leave out some notes. That feels maybe not brilliant, but it feels like at least slightly more musical.
what do you do to try to get outside your wheelhouse, so to speak, or to get outside those 10 licks that we all like to play, or even just the patterns that I find myself, if I'm not thinking too hard, like my fingers will just assume certain shapes or certain melodic ideas to get from one place to the next. What are some tips to kind of get outside the box in that sense?
I'm not sure, because like personally I feel like I'm much more averse to cliches than I should be, actually. Cliches bother me in a way that don't bother most humans. And I feel like there's a benefit to not being as annoyed by them as I am. Do you know what I mean? Like I think like it's part of language to use these familiar verbal phrases, and same with music. That said, when I feel myself really going to a cliche, I try and deviate from it. And it could be I start late, I start early, I play a smaller number of notes. There's that beautiful thing, like I was learning this dog thing yesterday for a student, and like, what is it? Right, there's that, what is it? El Quilpachero. And then he does... And you think it's going to be this, right? Like just coming down the D minor scale. But he does this thing. Nothing, again, not revolutionary, right. But it's better.
Totally, yeah.
And it's this is a cliche, right? I mean, the scale thing, it meets your expectation, but the fact that he just deviated by those two notes, that's a good way of like saying, it's not like we can't use cliches, but probably we should just figure out like some way to twist some slight aspect of it to give it an element of surprise or newness.
Yeah, I love that too, because it's like something that the listener can be cued into, and when you deviate from what's expected, they're like, oh, I see what you did there, you know, kind of thing.
Totally, yeah. You got to find a way to like make it understandable to the listener, and it's not an exclusionary thing. I completely think people need to be in on the joke or the story. Just
saw recently you've got this new project coming out soon, right? With Greg Garrison, Alex Hargraves, and Grant Gordy, right?
Yeah, it just came out maybe a week or two ago.
Yeah, I was listening to a couple tracks recently, and speaking of improvisation, you guys are having a conversation there, which I think is so moving and so engaging and interesting. Cool. And maybe we could talk a little bit about like improvising in community or in company like that. What's it like playing with those guys? I bet that's a blast.
It was really special. It was really beautiful. You know, it's just nice when you find your people for whom the things that are important to you can presume about them. And I think that was what happened there. We did a gig in England, and it just felt like, yeah, okay, this is great. We're all pushing in the same direction. Awesome. That and you totally focused right in on exactly what was special about that, is that it was really a group improvisation experience where the decisions each of us are making are in every moment going to be responsive to the decisions that the other person is making. But yeah, that was a beautiful thing. Like trying to be in the moment and being open to being responsive. Honestly, that's easier for me than trying to like if you were like, hey, please play the Beethoven Sonata exquisitely with a piano player. Playing exactly those notes in that order is harder. That's a lot harder for me.
And it's kind of nice not having that expectation where it's like, we're going to figure it out. You know, I guess that's what improvisation is, right? You're kind of discovering it in the moment, so to speak.
Yeah. With that context, if you take the Beethoven thing, there's correct and there's incorrect. And that's those are the notes.
Yeah.
You didn't play them. Okay. But like with improvising, it's so beautiful because like, okay, I'm not feeling this particular measure. Lay out. Okay, great. Oh, okay. It feels busy, or I want a moment to collect my thoughts. Lay out. Or you're inspired in this moment. Great, do it. I love that aspect, and there's no, black and white. Wrong.
Well, before we wrap up, man, I just wanted to ask what you're practicing right now, and if you have any like exercises or challenges that you would suggest for folks who are getting into improvisation or taking their improv to the next level. Any advice that you can give there?
Well, there's this thing that McGann, my old teacher, for anybody who doesn't know him, John McGann was an extremely great mandolin player, lived in Boston and passed away about 10 years ago. He had this saying that it's really hard to play something until you know what it sounds like. It's an extremely well stated idea that I didn't really appreciate for a while, and then I came back and I was like, He's so right. That's a focusing idea for me. If I want to improvise in this context, I need to know what is stylistic. I need to listen to it. I need to have a presumption of what people do in that style. The same is true for if I want to play a blues in F. Until I know what those chord tones sound like, it's really hard to use them. So doing the arpeggios isn't just about finger memory or reinforcing pathways. I start to hear the next change. I don't know, from the context of you or your listeners, I don't know if that E sounds strange, but the more you do this, the more it's not even going to be an intellectual thing anymore. It's going to be your ear is saying, okay, I want that sound in this moment. And that's super helpful for me.
Well, yeah, Joe, thanks so much for hanging with us today, for sharing your incredible wisdom on improv. I feel like I'm just like recording this personal lesson to share with other people. I feel like I've learned so much through this, man.
Oh, man, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation with Joe, and be sure to check out the links in the description below for his workshop on Peghead Nation for improvisation this summer. Also, be sure to check out that new record of his, Bluegrass and the Abstract Truth. It's a fantastic listen. I definitely recommend it. Also, if you enjoyed this interview and you want to support the channel and all the mandolin content here, be sure to check out my Patreon page at the link below too. There's tons of other learning resources like transcriptions and play-along tracks and all sorts of stuff. Be honored if you check it out. But most of all, thanks so much for watching. Thanks for subscribing and liking this video, and be on the lookout for more stuff like this soon. Until then, happy picking.